Thanks again to our panel this morning. I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Riwanto Tirtosudarmo, the author of the book which we will be discussing, From Colonization to Nation State. I have an older version. I think this is from Lipi Press, ya Pak ya. So perhaps some of you have an older version. In 2021, and Pak Riwanto will be discussing this. The book was republished with revisions and additions, and Pak Riwanto will give more information about this. And also welcome to Friends. I think I'm so happy this is Friends Meeting Friends, this event, yeah. Dr. Turro Wongkaren is the head of Lembaga Demografi at Universitas Indonesia, and
not anymore.
He's oh, you are not? Oh,
no. I got a new job also in the faculty actually, but it's since March. But it's okay. I'm still a researcher at Lembaga Demografi.
At Lembaga Demografi.
Yeah.
Okay. I know you got the new job. I thought it was like double assignment.
For a while it was.
No. Okay. So thank you for coming this morning. Pak Turro has a long association with the work of Pak Riwanto, so it's great that you can discuss the book with us. And also Ibu Palmira Bachtiar, Mbak Mia from the SMERU Research Institute, who also is a long time person with knowledge about Pak Riwanto's work. So welcome everyone, and for the first opening of our session this morning, I would like to invite Pak Riwanto to perhaps give a background of the book and also its content, Pak, for everyone here. And before we start, I also want to encourage you to ask your library or wherever you are institution to also purchase this book, or at UI, I encourage everyone to send an email to the library at UI to include the book in our e-book library so that people can access this very important resource. Pak Riwanto, the time is yours. Pak Riwanto, you are still unmuted. Pak, maaf Pak.
Thank you very much, Lydia, for the introductions. And good morning for everybody, especially my two discussants, Turro and Palmira, who, it's my longtime friends, and I'm very happy to meet this morning in this occasions. And of course, everybody who are attending this webinar. I couldn't see anybody, so for the one who already know me, it's not good to see you, and for others who just know me now, good to have you here. As Lydia have already set up the format of this webinar, I will follow her her guidance. I have prepared a few slides to make me easier to explain about the books, and hopefully also easier for anybody who want to questions, comments, or make kind of judgments about the books. So let me start with the slides. The book is called From Colonization to Nation State, the Political Demography of Indonesia. And as Lydia have already shown, this is the second editions or the new editions of a book with the same titles that published by LIPI in 2013. And as the new book, I would say that it's not really much different with the first editions. I make a few changes. I changed 2 chapters with the new ones. And also I add a kind of afterwards, or I call it in this book an epilogue, to kind of reflects what kind of challenges that we are facing as a nation state in the 21st century. So let me begin with the content of the book with the next slide, please. I like to begin by previous slide, please. Previous slide.
Sorry, this
Yes,
one?
here. Yes. Yes, I always like to present about Indonesia by showing first the map. Yeah. Although I think everybody are familiar with the map of Indonesia, but I just want to show. Back to the map, please. Yes. And here I quote George Keynes, who wrote in 1965. Maybe all of us are familiar with George Keynes. Is a professor of politics in Cornell University who happened to initiate what they call it the Modern Indonesia Project at Cornell University. And I like his word when he said that geography had a strong influence upon the course of Indonesia's history and has always conditioned severally the course of political developments. So you see that the geography of Indonesia is an island, an archipelago, thousands islands. And if you look at this map, then what is and how it connects between its islands. And in my view, then movement of peoples, migrations between islands. So by this, I want to say that when we talk about Indonesia, then migrations or movement of peoples within and between islands is an important social fact. Next, please. Next slide. The book, next slide, please. The book consists of 12 chapters. And in the first part, which I call it the demographic engineering and territorial integrity, there are 3 chapters from emigrasi to transmigrasi, transmigration and new orders development plan. And the 3rd chapter is the center regional context of transmigrations, the case of Rio and South Kalimantan. These 3 chapters represent actually my first writing during my time as a graduate student at ANU, who wrote a dissertation on transmigrations. So this is really consists of history of what I call it the demographic engineering policies. It's called emigracy or colonizations during the Dutch colonial time. And after independence, it's become transmigrations. it a state-sponsored population movement. And in the second chapters, I elaborate how transmigrations during the New Order developed, especially how they plan and execute transmigration policies. And in the third chapters, I show the evidence or the empirical evidence of how the context of central and regional governments shaping implementations in Rio and South Kalimantan province. Next slide. In the second part of the book, I call it Migration, Development, and Centralized State, which also consists of 3 chapters. First, migration pattern and development. This is really a kind of reviews of mostly various research on migration in Indonesia. And in the 5th chapters, I specifically looking at the Eastern Indonesian regions, and I try to relate what I call it underdevelopments and the politics of migration in Eastern Indonesia. And I think this is my attempt to see how migrations or movement of peoples then collided or convoluted with the politics, especially the ethnic politics in Eastern Indonesia. And in the next chapter, 6 chapters, I especially looking at the border area, and I took West Kalimantan to see how the political demography of the borderland area. This is still until today, I guess, and mostly still in the low kind of level of jobs. This is, and you move to the third part. Yeah, I already talked about this, and in chapter 8, I talked on the politics of regulating overseas migrant workers, which rather as the plan, I think the 2 discussions will comment on this content of the book. So I will finish by that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lydia is here again already. Bu Lydia, can I just continue so that we can move on? Okay. With the implicit permission from Lydia, according to the schedule that she already devised and told us, I will use the next 5 minutes to comment on the book. Let me share screen. Oh, okay. Unfortunately, the host disabled sharing the screen. It's okay. So let me just.
Sorry, I'm back inside. Sorry about this. I don't know. I think I'm going to blame it on the Bogor internet. I just turned on the share screen, Pak Turro.
Okay.
But I will just keep my video off in case that helps on my and the connection on my end. But you should be able to. Apologies, everyone.
Okay. Let me do fast. Can you see my slide? It's only 2 slides, so it's not.
Yes.
Okay, so that's my new affiliation, although I'm still affiliated with Lembaga Demography, but I guess I should put this here. So, the book. First of all, I would like thank you, Pak Riwanto, to invite me also to discuss this book, which I think is very exciting. And also as economist, demographer, and also social scientist, this is really a book that really needed, especially in this time of Indonesia being in a various stage of the country. So what I get from reading his book is that he's actually talking something about Indonesian project. I'm not referring to the institution that organized this FKP
Recording
webinar.
in progress.
I'm talking about the process in which Indonesian identity is being created and recreated. So it's a process. And in the content, Indonesian elites want it to be unity in diversity. Imagine Indonesian community atau what Pak Riwanto said, mystified unity or something like that, ya Pak ya, in the book. According to Anderson, but he refers to the European experience, what make the emerging community become a community is printed materials. But in Indonesia, especially during Suharto, he used one more tools, that is the use of palapa communication satellite. So that way people from Sabang to Merauke can see some Indonesian doing the Kelompok Chapter, if you guys remember. And we are told that this is Indonesia, everywhere is same. Now, ideally to have a truly unitary Indonesia atau negara kesatuan, Indonesian of various background, ethnicity, religious affiliation, place of origin, etc., must be allowed to move and mobile. Because if we cannot move and mobile without restriction, then it's not a unitary state. And we have to be allowed or be able to live side by side in peace. We have to be allowed, and in reality we do, marry people of different background and work in different occupation. If we actually don't allow this to really happen, then what happen is going to be either Indonesia consists of various area or places with people with different ethnic nationalism, and those area actually become stronger in their own identities, but not necessarily Indonesia, which create a problem. Or we become plural society, like Fornival mentioned in Burma in 19th century. Now, this Indonesian project to create Imagine Indonesian community have to be created and recreated. And the Indonesian elite use various policy, among others is transmigration. However, moving people around is not the same as economists. Also, we always talk about trade, how good and services moving from one place to another, or capital, for instance, foreign direct investment, capital investment move from one place to another. Because unlike those things, when we move people around, there will be social and political consequences, especially in destination area. In his book, Pak Riwanto really discuss and give a concrete examples of many areas that become an issue, which I think really needed, because this is that are still children of Order Baru, of the new order. We were not used to talk about Sarah. We were not used to talk about how people have social sentiment toward other people of different ethnicity, of different religions, because those will be fall under Sarah. classification, and no, we are not allowed. We were not allowed to even discuss something like that. So the fact that actually Pak Riwanto managed to not only write several articles on that, because the book basically also uh, a compilation of his articles in various places, but that he actually published a book, although it's after Orde Baru. I think it's really something that is good for us. So back to Indonesian project. The project aims to create multiple identities: Indonesian, ethnicity, religion, religious affiliation. But this is important, and some people might not agree with this statement. With Indonesian being the primary identities, that's something that we probably have to discuss in the midst of various identities or multiple identities. Where do we place our identities, certain identities? Which one is the most salient one? That's probably, I should just use the word the most salient one. A bit missing in the book as a demographer too, Pak Riwanto, is that I kind of miss interplay of migration and other demographic processes, fertility and mortality, because in some area actually, as particularly fertility, it's a big issue. For instance, in probably mentioned a little bit, but not really much. I would like to see more. How migration create a tension in Bali, for instance, create tension in Kalimantan or Papua, so much that many of the government, local government, reject family planning program because they think if the local or the native, quote unquote, are going to observe the family planning, only have one or two or three, while the migrants come with many kids or not even uh, necessarily many kids, but with many of them, then slowly the local people be replaced by the migrants. So this interplay between fertility and migration, I think, will be really great to see. Having said that, I really enjoy reading this book, and I really truly thank you, Pak Riwanto, for writing this book. This is something that is very important for our country at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Turro. Maybe before we move to Mbak Mia, if Pak Riwanto would like to address the the comments by Pak Turro about the more about the demographic side, fertility, etc. Maybe Pak Riwanto, if you'd like to address that first.
Thank you, Pak Turro, for your very insightful comments. I really delighted, and I agree with you totally that I miss in looking at the relation between migrations and fertility, especially, and mortality. I think that is the weakness of my demography. I it's not. I see myself as not really a good demographer because I'm not good in trying to look at these connections, fertility and migrations. And I agree with you that this is very important to pursue in the future. And I hope somebody else will work on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Riwanto. Next, let me invite Ibu Mia hello Mbak Mia, to give her overview and comments on the book. Silakan Mbak Mia.
Thank you very much, Mbak Lydia. Deep appreciation, of course, for your invitation. And I would like also to congratulate Dr. Riwanto for his very important publication. Dr. Riwanto has served as a role model for a productive researcher. In the book we are discussing today, Dr. Riwanto argued that demography has played important role in the shaping of our nation state, and demography has influenced politics and vice versa, and the interaction between these two variables took place during the colonization and afterwards. It interplays through movement of people, both engineer and voluntary, and both internally and internationally. My discussions point will cover the international migration. This is part 3 of the book, and this part, as Pak Riwanto has already explained, has 3 chapters. Indonesian and its neighbor, chapter 7, chapter 8, the politics of regulating overseas migrant workers, and chapter 9 is international migrant divide. I find these chapters very contributive to the body of knowledge in demography over a long period of time. And the chapter describe information in details and very rich in narrative. They also provide review of frameworks of security, stability, and frameworks of international political economy. Overall, I would say that this wide literature is invaluable for researcher, academics, and students, and those who are interested in the study of international migration. I only have 3 main points in these chapters. Number 1 is that I failed to find the information about international migration of skilled workers. We know that in a new era, a new order government, in Suharto era, teachers and lecturers are sent to help Malaysia in improvement of its education. That happens in 1970s. I could not find this information in Dr. Riwanto's book. I could not also find the migration of nurses to the Netherlands during the New Order government in 1970. So actually, there are instances where skilled migrant workers are moving overseas. The second part is actually on the politics of regulation. Pak Riwanto also has explained this, that the chapters record very, very, very detailed information about what happened prior to Reformation. However, the information afterwards, after Reformation, is lacking. Pak Riwanto just said that actually the regulation of migration is fragmented and it's ad hoc. So indeed, there is no information that written in the book regarding contestation of different stakeholders in the passing of law number 39 2004 on placement and protection of overseas migrant workers, and which actually the law was very much criticized for its dominance on placement, and the protection measure indeed was left to the hands of the private recruitment agencies. Actually, it takes 13 years for the NGOs, the academics, and the civil society organization to advocate the government and the parliament to pass new law. And after 13 years, we have now law number 18 2017 on protection of Indonesian migrant workers. If we look at these dynamics, there are a lot of discussion that one of the difficulties in the passing of new law is that many private recruitment agencies were holding political opposition in the parliament, and this makes the struggle even more intense. Yeah, so those kind of dynamics actually missing in the book. Last but not least, I noticed that Dr. Riwanto uses terminology of sending and receiving countries. I wonder why, because actually he conceptualized the migration as a movement of people voluntarily, in addition to engineering. So it would be probably more politically correct to use the term country of origin or home countries and country of destination or host countries, which give the meaning that migrant workers as subject rather than object or commodities. I think I'll stop at that point. I really enjoy reading the book, and it's an honor for me to give my discussion point to Dr. Riwanto. Thank you, Lydia. Back to you.
Thank you, Ibu Mia. Pak Riwanto, would you like to respond to some of the comments quickly, maybe?
Yeah.
Putting you in spot, Pak.
Well, sorry?
Putting
Can
you in
hear
the...
me?
Yes, putting you in the spot.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, again, I think I take the criticisms from Palmira that I think there are some missing in the book. I cannot defend myself. I accept. And there is no, I think I have not at all talking about the skilled migrant workers. I think not only teachers, lecturers, but now today's nurse and caregivers, but also not mentioned by Palmira is with its outside our radars as a migrations, say, peoples, is the movement of seamen or sailors, which I think we don't know so far how big these numbers, but I heard that Indonesian seamen or sailors is actually working everywhere globally. So I accept that I'm really miss these skilled workers. And also I think, yeah, after reformations, although I guess that still not very far from before, but you are quite right. But because then you can see the contestation between political parties in grabbing the opportunity to control the migrant workers. It's very intense. And lastly, I think about the terminology, I accept your criticisms, but I should be more appreciate to the migrant worker as subjects and looking at them as a kind of human agencies. Yeah. So I think with those three criticisms, I don't know whether I have time to to revise it in the futures, but anyway, somebody will know that the book has kind of limitations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pariwanto and Mbak Mia. And also, this is if people are watching and interested in pursuing research in this area, so much ideas here. Pariwanto, back to you, Pak. You have added an epilogue in this book and given your opinions on Indonesia facing the 21st century. Could you elaborate a bit more about that, Pak?
Yeah, I have prepared also a slide, and
Yes, Gali will help run the slides
uh,
um, from Jogja. So this is an international, well,
yeah,
collaboration.
actually, in it's open access. Yeah, the introductions and the epilogue of the book is can be accessed by everybody freely. So actually, you can see easily what I have written as a kind of epilogue for the book, and I call it Indonesia's political demographic challenges in the 21st centuries. But I think the editor of the book changed slightly by changing 21st century with the century. With maybe they are also correct, because in this epilogue I try to look at the history of 100, almost 100 years of what I call it political demography in Indonesia, or from colonizations to transmigrations until today. And I have a few slides. Maybe Gali can help me, only a few. I hope not too long. So I begin my epilogue or afterwards by actually looking at my own analysis with I wrote in Jakarta Post in 2015, which I said demography will remain one of the toughest challenges in Indonesia's futures. The silent natures of demographic pressures make the general public unaware of its profound impacts economically and politically. Managing demographic pressures requires a proper understanding of demographic characteristics and their interplay with other variables. I think I would like to go back to Turro's comment on my missing in relating migrations and fertility especially, which I think it's become very important to see how in the regions, in the provinces all over Indonesia, these two variables are interplay. And I think it will be very important to see how population dynamics or demographic changes actually become a kind of a silent forces. Nobody are aware, but the impact is very profound, especially in the longer terms. So I think it's become a kind of reminder of us that again demography should be studied, should be researched in a proper manner in the futures, to be able to kind of contribute to other disciplines or other sectors like policymakers or planners, which are needed the accurate demographic data. Next slide, Gali. Yes. this is partly after I see the trend of the population trends in the near futures. I found that one of the important features of the demographic change in Indonesia is what we call it, Indonesia has become more urbanized. More and more people living or reside in the urban areas than the rural areas. Of course, there are varieties between regions, between Java and other islands. But I think the tendency is very clear that Indonesian population is more and more flocking in the urban areas. And in this context, I read a book by Benedict Anderson. This is a different Anderson's Turro. This is not the Benedict Anderson that you mentioned earlier. This is another Anderson who wrote a book. He called it The City in Transgressions, Human Mobility and Resistance in the 21st Century. And he really locating human mobility in the crucial perspective. I just quote this word from him. As soon as I had some sort of understanding of the complex issues concerning global human mobility, new sets of circumstances and conditions would come to the fore. The endless string of human catastrophes that highlight the lengths to which refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants would go life lost in the deserts, at sea, in transit and refugees camp, in detention camp, suffocating in refrigerating trucks, enslaved, bought, sold, and sexually abused in conflict zones. These are just some of the harrowing experiences amid this unfolding human tragedy. Again, this is a kind of reminder that movement of people has become the kind of important, if not the most important features at the moment. And as Anderson's mentioned, I think we have to see how the sufferings that is also happen within this such global movements. So I really kind of enjoy reading his books, and I think it's become a very important reference for us in Indonesia. The next slide. So there are 3 slides that I borrowed from my dear friend Salut Muhyiddin. I'm not sure if he's around in this meeting, but I asked him if I can borrow the figures and tables from him, and he allowed me to use it as part of my epilogue. So you can see how the trend of the population growth here, and also the rate of growth, and it's very clear that we are continually growing, although the rate is slowing down. This is the first table. This is the pictures from 70 to now 2020. Then the next table, please, Kali. So then the implications is on the structures of Indonesian populations. You can see from this how the increase of the so-called lansia, or the age, and of course the decrease of the younger populations. But still, overall, I think we are continuing growing as a nation. The last tables, please, Kali. This is rather complicated. I'm very sorry, but I just want to maybe simplify by saying that this is population distributions between 70 to 2020, and you can see how actually, despite the efforts and the movement of people from Java to outside Java, the other islands, actually the imbalance still very high. I think the distribution between Java and other islands only slightly changes within years. Yeah, so Java still overcrowded, and there is a kind of imbalance demographically between Java and other islands. And in this occasion, I actually think that the idea to relocate the capitals by President Jokowi to Eastern Kalimantan, which is indeed controversial, I think it's, in my view, is a brave idea. And if it is successful, I think it will change the kind of gravitations from Java, hopefully to other to outside Java, and this is important for Indonesia's futures. But I would like to emphasize here, especially on the impact of migrations in provinces with actually a small number of the populations. So even the number of migrants look like very small in this graph, for example, in Papua, but I think it has a big impact, or a severe impact, or profound impacts on the local populations. I think Turro also has mentioned earlier, then there is a kind of problems, especially in Eastern Indonesia, as I mentioned in the book. But I would like to especially ask your attention to see Papua, because in Papua at the moment, I think tension is increasing, growing, and always migrants become the kind of victims, because they think migrants are perceived as marginalizing the local populations. And I think if you look at the statistic, it's very clear. In urban areas, the number or the proportions of migrant is getting bigger, and the proportions of the so-called local population is becoming fewer. And if you look at then the politics in Papua, it's become very kind of intricate, because there is serious tensions between the locals and the migrants, and with the local elections, the pemekaran, and so on, I think it will create even more conflicts in the futures. So I rather worried about the situation, especially in Papua today. Next slide, please. So in the last part of my epilogue, I tried to summarize or try to sum up what is actually happening within 100 years, within a centuries, because very interesting to see there are some parallels what happened in the beginning of the earlier 20th centuries and today, the beginning of the 21st centuries, from the political demographic perspective. There are some parallels, but also some contradictions, of course. So, of course, I will be very rather simplified in view of this situation, but this is what I see. First, I think the state, both the colonial and the post-colonial, continue to be confronted by the problem of demographic imbalance between inner and outer islands. This is not a proper word actually, inner and outer. It's rather colonial, or between Java and other islands. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, both colonial governments and the Indonesian government today still confronted by these imbalances. So various policies actually is trying to distribute or to influence the distribution of population, but at some point, I think the success is very limited. In the early 20th centuries, foreign capital began to take place in the colonial economy. And apparently it is also similar what is emphasized under the current government. So foreign investment has become a kind of panacea to solve the economy of these nations. Very similar, both in the beginning of the 20th centuries and today. And both the state, the colonial and the current governments show similar characteristics, as both are authoritarians and undemocratic, with the obsessions to develop modern public infrastructures. I think it's rather harsh criticism to the current governments, but I think that is what I see. I think controversies has been around for maybe the last 10 or 5 years, and how especially the current government tried to impose a new law, for example, on the Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja, which in my view basically also trying to pinpoint or to emphasize the need to attract the foreign investments. So again, I think this is the kind of policies that repeated or recurrently happens since 100 years ago. But the problem is the increasing of, in my view, economic inequality and social injustice within the limited few and the majority of the populations. And finally, the challenge of maintaining the territorial integrity as centrifugal tendencies in this country continue recurred since the beginning of the 20th centuries, when the Dutch struggled to conquer Aceh, and now the Indonesian government's confronting the separatist movement in Papua. So at least there are 5 parallels that I draw from my reflections looking at the political demography of these big nations within the 100 years, between the centuries. The next slide, please. This is a kind of a slide that rather personal, but I would like to mention it. This is from Graham Hugo, actually, who died not long after he wrote these comments, because I asked him to review or to comment on my book draft, my first book on the politics of migrations, published in 2018 also by Springer, and he kindly wrote this kind of endorsements. And I read here: migration is becoming an increasingly important element, not only in politics, but also in its economic, social, and demographic implications. Yet, the literature is meager, especially lacking work like Riwanto's that looks critically at conventional patterns and explanations and ask important questions. There is a considerable audience for the book. This is a book driven by ideas, not data, and is welcome partly for these reasons. Riwanto is able to effectively and appropriately use numbers when they are needed. Well, this is a kind of pujian or a compliment from Graham Hugo, who for a long time became my long-time gurus on migrations since 1980. And he actually, one of my external examiners, I couldn't forget it, when he asked me to revise the whole dissertation. And actually, I failed in his eyes as a demographer. But luckily, I think the two other examiners passed me, and I think Graham has accepted defeat at the time. But I really admire Graham Hugo, and when I asked him to comment on my book, I think he gave, for me, it's important kind of comments. Thank you, Lydia, and the others who still listening. I really enjoy this morning, and I hope my presentation will have some values to further studies on the issue of politics and demography, not only in Indonesia but everywhere. Again, thank you, and good morning.
Thank you, Pak Riwanto. I already see a couple of questions in the Q&A box, but before we get to the question, let me invite Pak Turro and Mbak Mia, but maybe is Pak Turro still here? About the key takeaways, I guess, that for your personally, or what you hope readers can get from the book. Maybe Pak Turro first.
Okay, thank you. Allow me to again share the screen. So I will talk about, well, two things, yeah. The first part is about how political demography is actually very important. I write this for those who are not really with demographic background. Demographic processes, as I mentioned before, apart from migration, also fertility and mortality. And the above processes will affect size, growth, age composition, and also geographical distribution. Now, all of these are related, actually, very closely related to political issue. Pak Riwanto's book already show how it's really important to look at the migration, especially. And if we look at migration, it can be by design, or I put that grand design, that this is, for instance, is the transmigration program, or the one that Pak Riwanto mentioned, and I will talk a little bit of that later. That is the movement of our capital city to East Kalimantan. And also possibly by product, low fertility in destination area. Example of this would be what happened in Europe today. So we see that European countries, many of them have very low fertility. As a result, after a while, they lack of people to work and do other stuff, though they have to import. But as I mentioned before, importing people is different from importing capital. Capital don't have religion, don't have ethnicity, culture, lifestyle, and so on. People or migrants, however, do. And if there are more of them, the size and the composition quite homogeneous and so on, then it will create a problem. And migration might be by individual choice. Most of, as economists, sometimes I realize that most our migration theory based on individual choice. Now, allow me to spend about a minute or two because I consider myself, even though I never really taken class from Pak Riwanto, but I'm his student in understanding the political process. And I try to kind of pick up of what he mentioned before. So let's talk about IKN. Let's talk about East Kalimantan. Unfortunately, the data about ethnicity in Indonesia only comes from the census. And the last census that has ethnicity is 2010, because the last 2020 census did not have the question on ethnicity. It will be only asked sometimes this year in June, when they have a long form of census. Anyway, so this is based on the data in 2010, and on the left is ISN or state employees in Jakarta. On the right is the population of East Kalimantan in 2010. Based on this, and then using the projection made by the Bappenas, BPS, and UNFPA, I make two scenarios. Actually, this is scenarios that were posed by Bappenas at the early plan of moving the capital. The first scenario is 870,000 state employees and their family members move to East Kalimantan. So this is the first. What happened if that's the case? So the initial condition in 2010, Javanese is the largest ethnic in East Kalimantan. Oh, I forgot to mention that probably this is actually already show how East Kalimantan is even today. The largest ethnicity is not of those from Kalimantan, like Bugis or Banjar or Dayak, but the two largest is Javanese and Bugis, which are migrants already. And actually, this is also one of the reasons why East Kalimantan won. At the time, Bappenas considered three areas, South Kalimantan, Central Kalimantan, and East Kalimantan. And at the end, this one won because it will be among others, the least friction, I think, because the Javanese is already majority. And look, if there's 870, then Javanese, of course, will still bigger. I'm using the composition of the ASN in DKI. But if the second scenario, where 1.5 million state employees and their family member move to East Kalimantan, then we can see that the composition will change. Javanese still the first, but not Bugis anymore. Dayak will be lower. Bugis will be number 3. Dayak will be much lower, and so on. So it means that what Pak Riwanto mentioned in the book, directly or indirectly, demographic really matters. If you have people with different ethnicity slowly changing and replacing, quote unquote, people of the native ethnicity. And we actually already saw that in DKI Jakarta, where Betawi is being marginalized and not living in the DKI, most of them, the Betawi people. So this is 2045. Now, the issue, sorry that I didn't translate into English. This is the educational composition. The national ASN or state employee has that inverse pyramid in terms of population education, while the lower part, both of the kabupaten that will serve as the basis for the new capital the educational attainment of the local. So as we can see here, the issue of inequality that Pak Riwanto brought up later will be an issue, a big issue. How do we try to avoid the fate of Betawi? It will remain to be seen because we don't want the Kalimantan people, not just East Kalimantan, but also the whole will feel that the capital is not ours. The capital is still Javanese. That will be very dangerous. And please note that what I mentioned in this simple exercise are the whole province, while the Nusantara itself is actually only part of the province. So if 1.5 million people move to say Bogor or something, then it will be very serious and it will have a strong consequence. That's it for me. Thank you very much. Again, I feel honored and really humbled that I was invited to be discussion for Pak Riwanto. Thank you. Return to Lydia.
Thank you, Pak Turro. Mbak Mia, maybe your comments on the key takeaways that you get from the book?
Yeah, thank you, Mbak Lydia. I also underline the epilogue that Dr. Riwanto just explained, and Pak Turro has also said earlier this morning that demography is about everything, and he also said that demography matters, yeah. But because it has silent characteristic, and that's why this explain why public seems to be unaware of demographic pressure. I really like this silent nature, and we all agree that demography is important issue. If you look at for example, if you look at the population structure at present, absolute number of aging population is growing rapidly. In the press release from the Ministry of Coordinating Ministry of Human Development, it is said that we are still enjoying demographic bonus until 2035, which is 13 years from now, and or even that. But by 2045, which is 23 years from now, we are entering the aging society. So there are a lot of important steps we have to make in this in facing this demographic pressure. I also would like to underline and Dr. Riwanto mentioned that Professor Hugo is also underlying this issue of data. In this context, I would like to refer to Dr. Riwanto's research paper, where in 2009 he wrote a research paper to accompany a human development report. And in that paper, he echoed that he did not find sufficient data and information to conclusively link migration and human development. This is very true. Migration statistic is infamously limited and scarce. The data is scattered and collected by different government agencies at the national, at the provincial, and at the district level, even at the village level, in different formats. So this creates difficulties for a researcher on international migration, as Dr. Riwanto said, to establish conclusion and deliver specific recommendations. Therefore, it is important for probably academics, for the government, and for NGOs to work together to improve availability of and accessibility, of course, data and information on migration. Now it's even better if it incorporate collaboration between home countries and host countries. That's on the data. I would also like to throw two ideas for Dr. Riwanto to expand his book. I would suggest that he add capability approach framework to complete chapter 2 of his book. In chapter 2, he incorporate international political economic framework at the global level and security stability framework at the country level. These frameworks can capture political structure and market forces. In addition to that, capability approach framework is also useful to capture agencies at the individual level, because with this framework we can see the extent to which, for example, international migration can broaden capability or potential function. And with freedom and choice, we can assess whether those workers can arrive at achieve functioning, namely human well-being. Meanwhile, we can also see whether structure and institution at the global and at the country level might or might not facilitate the achievement of worker functions. A second possibility of expansion is actually to see the role of technology. For example, internet, smartphone, and digitalization. Over time, technology has played an important part in demography and politics, even before COVID-19 pandemic, and it will continue at present and in the future. So more research is needed to explore the extent to which digitalization can facilitate safe migration, improve protection of the workers, and make recruitment fairer and more efficient. Also, to what extent digitalization can be used to campaign for effective return and reintegration of strategy. So those are among different interesting question that is relevant for expansion of this book. I stop at this point, Lydia. Again, I would like to congratulate Dr. Riwanto for his publication, very important publication. And I knew that he turns to be 70 this year. So let me take this opportunity to wish him all the best for his effort to keep being productive and inspiring researcher. Thank you.
Mbak Mia. Indeed, I've received a lot of comments about this event, mentioning that Pak Riwanto was their role model in conducting research. So your consistency, Pak, in undertaking the research path. So I see a couple of questions in the Q&A box. I asked Greg Chiaioli if he'd like to ask directly, but he's just had his voice is not very good, so I'm going to read it, Pak Riwanto. So the subtitle of the collection uses the term political demography. How do you define this term and differentiate it from other approaches in demography? And how would you situate your approach of political demography within what has been labeled the mobility turn in contemporary social sciences? So, Pak Riwanto, if others would like to ask questions, I think we're a little bit over, but I think if you would like to stay, we're happy to extend a little bit. Thank you. There's a couple more other questions, but Pak Riwanto, if you would like to address this first.
Yes, thank you very much, Greg, for the questions. How I put the political demography in maybe comparisons or with other approach, yeah. It's a difficult question for me because I think I need to explore with what is the other approach, and to be honest, I don't really know, because demography is then developing, in my view, by various disciplines, yeah, like political science, economics, sociology, and so on. They look, or they use demography, especially migration, within their own disciplines. So, for example, when we talk about migrations, mostly the literatures, it is understandably from the Western countries, is mostly talking about international migrations. The literature is mostly emphasized on international migration rather than internal or domestic migrations. So I think there is a need, actually, and I refer to what Turro and Palmira said, that for Indonesia, for example, I think we need really serious research on demography and how it relates with other issues. And in that sense, then we cannot avoid to try to do good research and find out the accurate demographic kind of data, which is, again, I think is a problem in the country. So back to your questions, Greg, and your second points, with you call it the if I'm not mistaken, the migration turn. What I can say, maybe I'm not quite answer your points. Maybe we can discuss later if we have time. It's really now the migration turns. Mobility is become a very important social phenomena. Say compare with the 80s or 90s. Not everybody now talking about migrations, about population movements. And I think it's become even more important after COVID-19, where we cannot avoid, when we talk about COVID, and we talk about population movement, but movement of humans. And I think it's really a time to see, as a social scientist, how well information technology and globalization as a whole is really influence and shaping up what will be the futures of all of us. I think beside other important issues like climate change and so on, but I think it's really movement of people. It's become very important, and the problem is still there. Refugees, asylum seekers, or urbanizations, which not making really change the conditions of the populations. But again, I think it's, in my view, it's really a migration turn now. Sorry if I'm not answering the question properly, but we can discuss maybe later. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Riwanto. There's a question from Pak Komarajaya. You raised this a little bit about Papua earlier, Pak Riwanto, but Pak Komara would like to have your opinion about what do you expect the final outcome for the addition of 3 provinces in Papua, Papua Selatan, Papua Tengah, dan Pegunungan in terms of regional economic productivity and also as regional integration towards becoming a nation state. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Komara, for your questions. Pak Komara is my good friend. It's always asks a very difficult questions. Yes, I really concerned about the development in Papua, and I'm afraid that the plan to make a new province, additional province, cannot be stopped because the government has changed the rule now. It's really depend only on the central governments. They don't even listen the voice of the population in Papua, which is considered before. So they can really go ahead with their plan to slice Papua into more than 2 provinces. Currently have 3, 4, 5. But looking at the grassroots levels, as far as I know, the resistance from the local population actually is very clear. They don't want. But of course, the elites, the bureaucrats are the one who are wanting the new province because they are the one who will be benefited. So it's really problematic for the futures of Papua, really, because the resistance movement, I think, will be getting stronger. And maybe the government is believe that they can control this kind of resentments or resistance. But it's become very difficult in the future, for one thing. And this is not much discussed at the moment, which I call it a long distance nationalism. The diaspora of the Papuan outside Indonesia, it's very important kind of resistance groups now, which maybe it can be controlled, but it's become very difficult. And for me, the futures of Papua, it's rather bleak, although the government will able to succeed with the Wongkaren, with the infrastructure development, but we cannot ignore the resistance which is growing, both in Papua and outside. And outside, I mean outside Indonesia and outside Papua, but within Indonesia. As you know, there are many Papuan students outside Papua, in Java, maybe in Sulawesi and so on. And they are kind of concerns with the development in Papua. So for me, Papua is a test for the nation's building for Indonesia in the future. So I really concerned about this part, Komara. And I don't believe that man can live with the bread alone, as we are all believe. So, well, economy maybe not solve the question of Papua. We need both economic approach and also political approach. And a dialogue, I think, should be given a chance to develop in solving the problem of Papua.
Thank you, Pak Riwanto. That's very sobering. I think we have one last question from Suryadi Basuki regarding the Malay people in Riau province, which is being marginalized, just like what is happening with Betawi people in Jakarta, or maybe this is a question. Is this a condition or situation between the Malay in Riau and Betawi in Jakarta? And what will be the crucial factor? Is it economic access, education, or others in terms of, I guess, avoiding being marginalized or continuing towards the path of Betawi people? Pak Riwanto. Dan
Yes, thank
selamat
you.
ulang tahun, Seth Suryadi.
Thank you. I think both Turro and Palmira also mentioned about this before, especially Turro with the statistic on East Kalimantan, I think. And it's worrying. I mean, if the politics of identity still become a kind of trend, and we are not talking about religions yet, but if you put religions in the equations, then I think not only ethnicity, but also religions. So again, I think the process of marginalizations, it's happened everywhere, not only in Riau, certainly will be in East Kalimantan, in Papua, but also here in Jawa. So there is something wrong in our development or economic paradigm actually, which is, again, as I mentioned in my epilogue, it's actually repeating what the Dutch doing in the beginning of the 20th century. We rely not on our own resources. We not really believe that we are able to develop ourselves, but we tend to leave, we tend to let the foreign kind of investors or others to impose our development goals or development path. Then this is a really problem for us, and I think Turro also mentions, Palmira also mentions, and I believe all of us also concerned with this, the problem of inequality, social justice. And I think we have a problem there. And although I think everybody now seems happy with no problem with rice and so on, but of course we have a problem with minyak goreng just a few weeks ago. It shows how vulnerable actually that the people at the grassroots level, it easily marginalized, easily getting poorer and less access to the economic kind of things. So it's the problem of all of us. I think we have to think about how we can resolve this issue. It's not easy. It's always there. Maybe since the beginning of this nation state, proclaimed as a sovereign state, but we continue facing the problem of inequality, social justice. And maybe I will end that notes as a kind of closing statement that, well, we might be survived as a nation state, but maybe we can be failed in fulfilling the promise of independence, that is the justice for all, the welfare for all. And if not, then we will continue as a nation that carry out this kind of burdens. Thank you very much for your attentions, and I hope, well, there is something you can learn from the discussion. I myself really enjoy and learn a lot from Palmira and Turro, and I hope as a younger generation that mine, they will continue seriously doing research on these issues, maybe some other people too. And well, I think despite all the difficulties, I think we have to always optimist to the future. Thank you so much, Lydia. Thank you so much for organizing this. For me, it's very kind of learning process also, and thank you for FKP for organizing this. And again, sampai ketemu di lain kesempatan. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pak Riwanto, and a very good message at the end. Both whether we just want to survive as a nation state, but leaving behind and marginalizing some of our compatriots, not including them in the promise of kemerdekaan. And also, this is I think. I see a lot of people doing research in this area in Riau and Mia in international migration. So perhaps we can have a compendium on migration by several researchers in Bahasa Indonesia, because I think this is a very there's not many references in Bahasa Indonesia about this area. So Pak Riwanto's call for the younger generation to continue looking into this, I think, is very important topic. So with that, I thank everyone, the panel, for coming and your time for Forum Kajian Pembangunan. And I apologize for the interruptions that I caused earlier. And thank you for your patience, everybody. We will put the slides in our usual Google Drive, and I've just put that again in the chat box if people are not familiar, but everyone can download all the slides that we've ever had on FKP. So with that, I wish everyone, if I don't see you or talk with you again before Idul Fitri, if you celebrate Idul Fitri, best wishes for the rest of Ramadan, and also selamat menjelang Idul Fitri for everyone. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Sampai jumpa. We'll have FKP again next week, a couple of them. I will put the information, but if you want to get out of the room, feel free to check out anytime. All right, thank you everyone.
Thank you. Selamat ulang tahun, Pak Riwanto.
Oke, terima kasih banyak.
Selamat Pak. Terima kasih.